What's up, gang? If you've been wanting to deer hunt out of state but you weren't quite sure where to start to plan, then this video is for you. Today I'm going over my process for how I plan a DIY out-of-state public land whitetail hunt. My name's Clint Campbell, and if you're not familiar with this channel, we cover everything related to tips, tactics, and strategies to help us all become better bow hunters. One of the most frequently asked questions I get on the podcast is related to planning a DIY out-of-state public land whitetail hunt. I've been doing it for years now, and I've kind of put a system together that helps me make the planning process a little easier and hopefully helps me fill a few tags along the way. So what I thought I would do is I would create a three-part series, a video series for you guys to check out. This first one being around the actual planning, the nuts and bolts of planning the actual hunt itself. The second part will be kind of going into some of the strategies that I use whenever I am doing these out-of-state hunts, really kind of focusing on freelance hunting. The third video I'll put out will kind of tie all the videos together and will show you how all this stuff came to fruition on my most recent hunt in Iowa. So the one thing I think that there's a misconception about whenever people are trying to plan these out-of-state whitetail hunts is that they think that it has to be expensive, and that's just not the case. I think there's some things that you can do in terms of trade-offs that can either make the hunt more expensive or cheaper and a little bit more attainable. I'll talk about a few of those trade-offs as I go through the video, as I outline the process that I use to kind of plan these hunts. So the first thing you want to do is set your goals. And there's a couple things you need to consider as you're going through this goal planning phase of the process. The first thing you need to do is consider what type of hunt you want to have. You need to think about the caliber of animal you want to chase. You need to think about the type of terrain that you want to hunt and what type of habitat you want to hunt. Are you looking to hunt an area in a type of situation where you've never hunted before, where it's going to be a steep learning curve? Or are you looking to try to hunt an area that has, maybe familiar topography and familiar habitat to what you're used to hunting in your home state to maybe help increase the odds of success? When you're considering the type of terrain that you're going to hunt, you might want to also take into account your fitness level as well. You want to make sure that whatever hunt you're planning, that you're physically able to meet the challenges that terrain is going to provide you during the course of the hunt. There's two areas here where you can make some trade-offs to lessen the cost of the hunt. One is, how far are you willing to travel? Are you looking to travel 16, 20 hours, to do this out of state hunt? Depending on, for me being in Pennsylvania, a really far trip would be going somewhere like Iowa or even, Illinois for that matter. Or are you looking to stay closer to home, which might be, 3, 4, 5, 6 hours away from your home state to get into some decent public land that might give you a better chance at the caliber of deer that you're looking to hunt. So for me, that easier hunt is headed to Ohio, and that's the hunt that I'll do most often, and I'll look to travel further away, maybe every other year or every 2 years, where I'll take that longer trip, and that'll increase the cost of the hunt a little bit. The other trade-off that you can consider making as well is, are you looking to hunt as a non-resident in a draw state, or are you looking specifically for over-the-counter states? This will probably be one of the biggest things that will change the cost dynamic of your trip overall. So keep that in mind whenever you're thinking about planning these hunts. The next thing you'll want to do is begin to narrow down that list of states that meet the goals that you outlined previously. So you need to think about, does that state offer sufficient public land to hunt? Do you want it to be close enough to where you can do a boots on the ground scout and maybe hang some trail cameras? If not, if you're willing to pick a piece that's further away, can I e-scout it effectively, and do I feel confident in that? And can I then go and do a freelance hunt pretty much for the duration of the trip? I think the other thing that plays into this as well is, how long are you planning to go for? Is this a 5-day trip, or is this a 10-day trip? Because you probably want to approach it a little bit differently depending on how much time you're planning to spend there. Once you have the state narrowed down and you've kind of chosen which state you think is going to be best suit your, the goals that you've outlined, you can start to now look at what counties might have the best opportunity or the better deer, or maybe better deer density for that matter, that you start to hone in on. There's a bunch of different ways you can start to qualify these pieces. One way is look at your social network. Do you have people who live in those areas, or that you follow that live in those areas that you can start to tap for information? There's a ton of forums out there that are hunting related pretty much for every state. I know Pennsylvania has one, Kansas has a hunting forum. You can go on there and ask some people who actually live there, their opinion, and help get some guidance there. What you don't want to do is just walk into those forums and say, hey, I'm coming from out of state, where should I hunt? You're probably going to get crickets. At this point now, you've narrowed down what county or counties that you're going to focus on. The next thing you want to understand is the license privileges in that area. Depending on what state you're hunting, like for Pennsylvania, when you buy a Pennsylvania hunting license, that buck tag is good for the entire state. When you buy one in Ohio, that buck tag is good for the entire state. But when you're going to places like, Iowa, it's very specific in what that tag is good for. So you might get a hunting license that might be good for the state, but your buck tag or your specific tag may be good for only a specific zone. So you're going to want to familiarize yourself with the different regulations that each state has that comes along with their license and the tags. If this is more of a long-term plan and this isn't something you're looking to do maybe this year or this next hunting season, and you're looking for maybe, lottery states, you're going to want to start to purchase your preference points now. If you're looking to hunt Iowa, it's going to probably take you 4-ish years to get those preference points, if not 5 years to get the preference points to actually draw a tag. Kansas is a place where it's a lottery system, but you can probably draw a little bit more frequently. For me personally, the way I do is I purchase points in the states that I think that I'm going to want to hunt in the next 3 to 5 years, and I start accumulating points. And then the years in between that I don't draw a tag in a lottery for one of those states, I buy over-the-counter tags and over-the-counter states and hunt those years in between. One of the trade-offs to make in this section is whether you want to hunt over-the-counter or whether you want to hunt draw states. Draw states obviously are going to be a little bit more expensive. Over-the-counter tags are going to be a little less expensive. At this point, I'm ready to start narrowing the public that I'm interested in possibly hunting. So typically, what I'm going to look for, and we'll jump to the map here, is I'm going to look for pieces that are further away from metro areas. So I'm just going to look at Missouri here because it's a place that's an over-the-counter tag, and it's a state that I've started to consider for my years in between whenever I'm not drawing a lottery draw tag. So if I zoom out here and we look at Missouri, the places I'm going to stay away from, of course, are going to be anything close to Kansas City and anything close to St. Louis. And probably I'm going to kill anything that's probably within a reasonable drive of Interstate 70 that's running east and west. That's a big known highway. It's a big travel corridor. That's likely, I don't know much about Missouri, but it's likely going to have more of your population around that interstate. So I'm going to steer clear of that. Where I'm actually going to go, and I have been considering, is I'm going to go to the northeast part of Missouri that is up near the border of Iowa for a couple reasons. One, I hunted this line here where I have all these pins dropped. That's where I hunted Iowa most recently. And I know that area is super rural, not heavily populated. So what I'm thinking is that across the border here, that it's likely similar population or similar population density as the area that I was hunting in Iowa. Not to mention that it's just across the river from Iowa. So I'm thinking really that I probably will have a similar caliber of deer that I'll be able to hunt in this general area. So that's the first thing I'm looking for. I'm getting away from population metro areas, getting away from I-70, looking for somewhere that's going to be pretty rural, and it's going to likely give me the similar caliber of deer that I had an experience with in Iowa. The next thing I'm going to start to look at is the public that's specifically in here. Now, there's just a handful of chunks, which doesn't bother me too much because I know that I'm away from densely populated areas. And I'm going to start to look at these handful of chunks that are here. Now, for me, I prefer larger acreage than smaller acreage. For one, on a hunt like in Missouri, I'm not going to have a lot of opportunity to go out there and scout. So I'm going to have to freelance hunt probably, I would say 85 to 90% of the hunt is going to be freelance. And so with that, I'm going to want some acreage because I'm going to try to cover a lot of ground every day in scouting and hiking just to kind of find hot sign and hunt the way I like to hunt and be super mobile. So with these parcels, I'm kind of zooming in here a little bit. I'm going to look at this parcel here, which I believe is about 1,600 acres. This one here, I want to say, is a little over 2,000. And then this one here as well is, I believe, over 2,000 acres. The reason I picked this general area and these three pieces, there's of course a couple other smaller pieces here, and I'm not saying I wouldn't necessarily hit those, but those are the three that I'd probably prioritize. And the reason I like this area is that I can probably stay somewhere, in the middle of these three pieces and get to them within a half-hour drive. I mapped these out previously, and I know that they're all about 30 minutes drive from one another. That way I'm not burning days trying to find deer on a piece where it's just not worth spending time on. Once I've kind of outlined these pieces and I know which three pieces of public or the general pieces of public that I'm going to want to look at or that I'm going to probably spend time hunting, the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to reach out to wildlife biologists. I'm going to get a read on, I'm going to ask those questions, how much pressure does it get? What are the food source situations? What's the species of trees that are mainly inhabiting this? Does it have a lot of oak flats or does it not have a lot of oak flats? The other thing I'm kind of looking for too, if we dive in here, what I really liked about a couple of these pieces was this piece right here, a nice long river bottom here. That to me is interesting because it's going to have anywhere you have water kind of meeting meeting land, you're going to likely have diversity of habitat there. So you're probably going to have a little bit of marsh, you're probably going to have a little bit of swampy areas. And then if we zoom in a little further, you get some ridges and so forth, get into some, normal topography that I'm used to from hunting Ohio, the area that I hunted in Iowa, and then of course, the places I hunt in Pennsylvania growing up. Now that I've figured out what state I'm headed to, I figured out the county, I've narrowed down the zone. We actually looked at, 3 pieces of public that I'm going to focus in on, and started to kind of look at the map and decide why I'm choosing those, and roughly where I want to stay. And I'm choosing them because of how close they are to one another and I can travel between. The next thing you're going to want to think about is your shelter, right? Where exactly are you staying? What are you going to be using? There's a bunch of different ways you can do this. They range from the most expensive to the least expensive. And the first one is the most expensive version would be a cabin or a hotel. This is, of course, the most expensive. It's going to be the most comfortable, but it also may not be the most conveniently located. Like when we were looking at the map, I'm looking for something that might be centrally located so I can get to any one of those 3 pieces of public within a reasonable drive time. The next option might be, an RV and going to a campsite like a KOA or maybe a state campground or something like that. Those RV campsites are usually, I've paid about $15 per campsite in the past. I don't personally own an RV, so one of the things I've done is rent a pull behind camper to take along with me on some of these trips. It's like the Airbnb of camper renting. It's actually called RV Share. I'll put the link to that in the description. The other option is one of my personal favorites, is you just kind of make do with what you have. If you have an old box trailer, you pull that box trailer behind you. If you have a comfortable cot, make sure wherever you're camping that you have an electrical hookup. That way you can at least use a small electric heater to cut the chill. That way you can sleep comfortably at night. I did a 9 to 10 day hunt with my buddy in one of these in some pretty cold temperatures, and it worked out just fine. The last option, which is always a viable option, is tent camping, and there's actually a part 2 to this one. So tent camping is one of the options. If you're using this option, super cheap. Those campsites are usually like anywhere from like $5 to $8 for the campsite that you'll pay. But you want to make sure that you have a decent tent, because especially if you get any weather coming in, the last thing you're going to want to do is try to dry out in a tent that's not keeping you dry. The other option here that I've used is actually truck camping. And I usually will use these whenever I'm doing shorter, like 2 to 3 day trips, where I'm headed somewhere that's not too far away, where I basically will use the bed of my truck as my suitcase, so to speak, and I will sleep in the back of it by flipping my seats up and sleep on the floor in a sleeping bag. And it's worked out great for some smaller, shorter 2 to 3 day trips. One of the areas that gets overlooked on these trips, in my opinion, is the planning for what you're going to eat each day. It's really quick to rack up bills and spend a lot of money whenever you're eating and buying food every day. The most important part of the meal plan prep is whatever you're going to have for dinner, because this is the one meal that you're probably going to eat during the course of your trip that's going to be where you're going to get most of your calories and most of your energy from to hunt and push through the next day. So what I do is I kind of meal prep everything for the entire trip. So if I'm going for 7 days and I'm going to be there, say 7 nights, I know I'm going to need 7 dinners or 10 dinners or whatever it is. I'll pre-make all the meals, and there'll always be something that's really easy to heat up. So it's a lot of, soups and chilies and things of that nature that I'll take. I'll make it here at the house before I leave. I'll freeze them all in gallon bags. That way, whatever I'm going to eat the day that I'm hunting, that particular day, I pull it out, I let it thaw out. Whenever I get home, I take a crock pot along with me, which is why it's important to have an electrical hookup. When I get back from hunting, I'll take one of those meals out of a gallon freezer bag, throw it in the crock pot, put the crock pot on high, watch it for about 40 minutes, heats it up. As for the gear that I take along on these trips, I'll do a separate video for that will outline everything that I take along. But in the meantime, I do have a PDF that you can download that is a gear checklist and kind of outlines these steps that I've been talking about, along with all the gear you might want to consider taking along for one of these trips. I'll be creating 2 more videos as I'd mentioned in the beginning of the video that will outline the strategy that I use to freelance hunt some of these public pieces that I get to, as well as outlining exactly how I use this process to fill my tag in Iowa. So if you're not subscribed to the channel, hit that subscribe button and the bell notification to make sure that you get all the latest videos and upcoming podcasts.